Moni in studio. Good evening to you, and thank you for coming in once again. I mean, this is quite an extraordinary story. So often Labour experts will tell us what to do, will give us the procedures to follow when people face this kind of thing, and it seems in many respects Garane followed the textbook example of what to do. Didn't work for him, did it?
It didn't work for him, and you say it is an extraordinary story, but this happens all the time, because when you're suffering workplace bullying, you start to experience depression, burnout, anxiety, and that, if it's not controlled, and if you're not unable to rehabilitate yourself, it then moves on to suicidal thoughts. You will see that Parliament had an extraordinary reaction to what was being told to us by the deceased's family. They all of a sudden started saying we need to make the place more secure, more safe, check everybody for guns. And that's because they're scared that somebody else is going to go and shoot other people in a reaction to the bullies.
But I mean, it's quite extraordinary even how they've responded to it. They don't want to comment on it. As you say, they want to look at safety issues within the parliamentary precinct. The only person who's been suspended in all of this isn't the alleged bully. No. It's a security official in terms of how the gun entered the precinct in the first place.
Absolutely, and that shows us as citizens that our leaders are not taking this seriously. Our leaders are treating some sort of symptom as opposed to treating the cause. And if you look at the deceased, what he did was, you're right, he followed a textbook approach. He complained. He was aggrieved. He then made a protected disclosure. Now all of a sudden Parliament wants to open up some sort of negotiation or constitute some sort of investigation around it. Why didn't they investigate it in the first place?
You could call it a common myth perhaps, or misperception about what workplace bullying is and to whom it happens. I mean, Lennox Garane was a 57-year-old man. He was well qualified, I understand, at least at the master's level degree. I mean, this wasn't some junior employee to be sent around to do menial tasks. This shouldn't have happened to him. At least that's the perception of how bullying works, isn't it?
Bullying is antagonistic. It's a persistent, hostile environment. It's microaggression, and it is normally about a power disparity. So your leader, your manager, who should be growing you into his or her own position, is somehow jealous of you, or somehow is going to harass you and victimize you because of who you are.
You define it as, you've just said now, it's persistent, but also that it's intentional, it can be overt. The intention is to humiliate. So there is no point ever that the bully can say, oh, I didn't realize, I was just being a taskmaster, I was just being somebody who was a demanding leader. There's no grey area, is there?
I don't believe that there is. But it is certainly viewed in two different ways. The bully will turn around and say, I was just being a hard taskmaster. I was getting the best out of these people. I don't really deem myself as a bully. But it's the target that is the person that is going to say, look, you were a bully. You cancelled my leave. I wasn't allowed to take leave with my children. I wasn't allowed to rest and relax. When I told you that I was burnt out and I needed to take that extra sick leave, you then took my laptop away from me so I couldn't work from home, etc. You know, it's all these microaggressions that happen day in and day out. Do you know, Bongani, when you often don't realize that you've been bullied until it's too late, until you're suffering some sort of psychological, emotional, or even physical disease, or you know, and you often don't realize it until you reach that point.
So how many walking wounded, shall we call them, around in corporate South Africa, not only you know, in formal employment, but I suppose all over in all kinds of sectors?
It's everywhere, and it's proliferating. And when I say it's everywhere, it's in your huge organizations where it takes very, very long for your executive or for your management to make decisions. And what you find is management starts to either sweep it under the table or kick the can. In other words, you're aiming to make sure that somehow you could kick the can so far that it's unreachable and it's not going to be dealt with.
One can obviously only speculate, but presumably if everything that's alleged in the note is true, the accused bully could now cover his or her tracks. And of course, a lot of those people who would have been a party or witnesses to what is mentioned in that note are still there in what might be a very toxic environment. It is a poisonous environment, and from what I have experienced and seen and read and heard of the reaction of Parliament, I don't think that they're ever going to try and get to the bottom of it. So the only way that I can envisage it is it's a festering wound, and they're refusing to clean it. What do you do when your boss or the bully is a connected person? I mean, is there any hope when you're at the receiving end of this kind of thing from someone who's very powerful? Well, the deceased didn't believe that after he had done everything in his power to do that. But there is hope. He has opened up the wound, and it's now up to us to clean it out and to make sure that parliamentarians aren't the political beings that they want themselves to be, but actually good managers, good leaders. Should anti-bullying training be offered as a matter of course to anyone who's in a management position? Absolutely, and not only to those in a management position, but those like the deceased who have these degrees, who have a possibility of a very, very bright future, bright career, bright livelihood, to learn how to become a manager himself and to deal with very difficult, very peculiar kind of personalities. So to someone watching us now and who's wondering, am I being bullied? Am I imagining it? What's happening to me? What are some of the key markers people should think about, whether in terms of being perpetrators or victims? The victim, I'd like to call them targets, because you really are a sitting duck, and things are happening to you. So for instance, they want you to work after hours, and your manager promises you a bonus or promises you a particular performance rating, and you don't get it, and there's some nebulous reason as to why, and you slowly but surely working yourself literally to death. If you wake up in the morning and you just don't want to go to work, if your manager is shouting at you, if you have to take put drops in your eyes to stop you from crying, if your manager targets you specifically, even though you are an A-type personality and you're doing your job well, then I'm afraid that is a perfect example of you being bullied. And it's the microaggressions, isn't it? The fact that you can't always necessarily have a formal complaint based on what might be a small issue if seen in isolation. Can I help you here and help those people who are being bullied here? Get a collective going. Talk. Suss it out with your colleagues. See whether or not you are on the right path, whether there is something different about you, or whether you're being treated differently. Start documenting things. I always say paper trail, paper trail, paper trail. It has to be a very black and white thing. It can't be grey. Otherwise you are going to land up either in a hospital with a mental condition and emotionally scarred for life, Bongani. Suicide protest. I mean, I think there's no other way to look at how serious this can be. Thank you so much for coming in and giving us those tips. That was, of course, Labour specialist Natasha Moni, just outlining what to do should you find yourself in this situation. Really, really tragic story coming out of Parliament. Let's hope whatever investigation unfolds will somehow get to the bottom of what happened.